Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It's 10 o'clock p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Friday night, February 3rd. This is Child Abuse Prevention is Up to Us, and it's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And chat room's open. I did pop the link in there, and I did find something I wanted to talk about tonight. I've kind of been skipping a lot of my shows lately, and I was talking about that on a few shows before, just because I've been exhausted and extremely busy. But I like to do these shows. This is very important to me. Child abuse prevention is really, it's my main mission. I have to work full time, and I have a life outside of this. And, also I'm studying, always working on that. But this is so important, child abuse prevention. Like, kids are dying, and if they're not dying, they're being abused and mistreated in every part of the world, But, my main focus is North America, obviously, Canada and United States. And the sad issue is that, we're going to lose so many, tonight. We're going to lose so many tomorrow. We're going to lose so many the next day. I mean, how many children's lives really, is that we say, okay, now we have to do something about this. Like, this is an epidemic, and it's a real problem. And sadly enough, people don't really think that children's lives are really worth anything, obviously, right? It's not a big deal that we lose so many children. Otherwise, we'd be doing something about it, And it's sad, like, for children dying from other things like childhood diseases and whatnot. I always feel really bad for children around the world who are suffering from, genetic diseases or cancers or this type of thing, childhood cancers or accidents. You hear of children dying in accidents or becoming named in accidents and things. It's always very tragic. But what really bothers me is these people that intentionally, willfully, with the intent, to hurt and maim and kill children, whether it's their own child or somebody else's. And it's got to stop. This is very much a socially not acceptable thing to do, and yet we're allowing these people to continue to do this stuff. We're allowing people with past histories who have past abusive histories of abusing children sexually or in any other way to have contact with children. Why? I mean, we're allowing parents who have killed previous children to have more children. Why? To me, like, that's not right. We owe these children protection. And, we as a society and as a human population on this globe owe these children protection. And if their own parents aren't going to do it, we got to figure out some way to do it. If their own caregivers or whoever's raising these children. So, this topic's really important to me, and I would hope that anybody who's tuning in, it's important to you too. And most people who would be listening to my shows, it's obviously important. I've been talking for about 900 shows now, and over 2 years, and I don't have any idea how long I'll continue to do this. But I figure, it's worth it. People are listening, and people are tuning in, and as long as one person's tuning in, it's worth it to me. I appreciate everybody who's taken the time to listen to my shows. You have to listen at your own discretion to all of my shows. If you go back and listen to all of my shows, I do have a disclaimer on all of them. I talk about abuse. I'm talking about a very sensitive subject that, I don't sugarcoat. I just tell it like it is. And it's because I've lived my whole life like this. I was abused as a child, and my siblings as well, and I grew up in a hellhole. And I just, like so many survivors, I just tell it like it is, because there's no sense in making this look pretty or cute or, not it's such a big deal. This is a big deal. These are lives, human lives at stake here. And because they're babies and children, people don't put too much stock into it, because they figure, oh, well, I don't have a relationship with those children or that child, so what's the big deal? It's just like any other human rights abuse. People think, well, I don't have a relationship with those people, so what does it really matter? Well, it really matters to me, because human life is all of our own right. We come into the world, you get the opportunity to be born into this earth. You should have the right to live it out as best as possible. And these children are not getting that. They're not getting those rights afforded to them. These children that are being murdered and killed and maimed and tortured, and or even if they survive, they're going to have to live a lifetime of all kinds of problems, which that's what I talk about on my show, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. Just the issues of dealing with the aftermath of being abused, and then, which is cyclical and continues on. It's absolutely pathetic. We have to change this. So that's why I do these shows, So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate it. If you're 18 and under, I just ask that you have an adult listen to the show with you so they can help you make a decision whether or not you should be listening age appropriately, right? And everyone else, listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about abuse, and if you're not sure if the topics of abuse might bother you, then you need to make the right decision for yourself and not listen to the shows, right? So we'll get right into this. I want to talk about maltreatment in the developing child, or how early childhood experience shapes child and culture. This was from Bruce D. Perry, MD, PhD. It's an inaugural lecture from the Margaret McCain lecture series. And this is from lfcc.on.ca. And they have a PDF there. You can download the PDF. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about what, some of the main points of this PDF. It's 6 pages, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I just wanted to point out some of the really harsh stuff that happens when children are maltreated, growing up in being maltreated in some way, and the effects that it will have on their brain, and the effects that it will have on a child, right? People don't really think child maltreatment really bothers or hurts a child, or that they should be able to just bounce back. But the issues are that a child's brain is affected by physiologically, not just psychologically, not just the emotions and all that stuff. That's all the psychology, right? We're talking about the physiology, the actual brain matter, the brain size, what the material that the brain is made out of, the fleshy part of the brain is changed because of the maltreatment. And I want people to understand that it's not just a psychological issue, it's very much a physiological issue too. And people don't seem to understand that the seriousness. They think that child abuse is like discipline. That people are screaming out because kids getting spanked. We're not talking about spanking. We're not talking about real discipline that is really considered to be okay. You know what I mean? It's not hurting the child. It's not harming the child. We're not talking about discipline. No, we're talking about abuse and maltreatment and neglect. And this is completely different than discipline. And people just don't seem to have a clue. And what it is just a lack of education. It's just, and there's people out there that like to argue this stuff, but it is complete lack of education. And if people would just get the information and educate themselves, they would see that there is a real big difference between discipline and abuse, right? Now, I know for a fact because I was abused, right? So I know what the difference is, right? But some people don't, and they think that, that people who are out here saying, oh, we got to stop child abuse, that we're all just talking about discipline, but we're not. We're talking about issues that are killing children, and ruining their lives, even if it doesn't kill them, causing them severe problems. And some of these severe problems, dealing with maltreatment of children, they list here in this actual PDF from Perry. And so if you go to that website and check out that actual PDF, we got some really good information here. And they said, disrupted development. They said, while most children experience safe and stable upbringings, we know all too well that many children do not. And the very biological gifts that make early childhood a time of great opportunity also make children very vulnerable to negative experiences. So inappropriate or abusive caregiving, a lack of nurturing, chaotic and cognitively or relationally impoverished environments, unpredictable stress, persisting fear, and persisting physical threat. These adverse effects could be associated with stressed, inexperienced, ill-informed, preoccupied, or isolated caregivers. Parental substance abuse and or alcoholism, social isolation, or family violence. Now, my parents were all of that. My parents were actually mentally ill at the time they were brought up on charges. They had to go for psych tests because they were being brought up on child abuse charges, and they went for psych tests, and both my parents were found to be mentally ill, because they were abused themselves as children, and they had mental illness because of that. All kinds of behavioral problems, issues that they needed to work out. And as well, my dad was diagnosed with some really sort of biological mental illness that comes through his family, which is schizophrenia, right? So, and borderline personality disorder, that type of stuff. So my parents were both mentally ill, and they were not capable. They were not able to cope, even on their own, not able to cope with life because they were both abused. They were both mistreated as children in harsh ways, and they both came together unable to cope, and then were unable to cope together, and so they provided this this very chaotic, dysfunctional, abusive, violent lifestyle for us, right? And so they didn't drink and they weren't on drugs. My parents were stone cold sober when they were doing this stuff. They were just not able to cope, and they were hateful people. They had all kinds of personality disorders, and they hated their life. They had felt that they were out of control and that everything was out of control, and so they figured violence was the only way to control it. So they would just resort to violence to try to solve the family's problems. Right? My dad was physically violent to my mother. My mother was physically violent to my dad. My dad was physically violent to all of his children, and verbally, emotionally, psychologically violent. My mother was the same way. She was abusing all the children as well. So they both got busted on child abuse charges, and we were left in the home because they didn't consider it to be life-threatening. But they did say we would be removed if certain conditions were not met. So my parents were told what to do to change things, to stay in the home. And did they change it? No. But this was back in the 60s where they just dropped the ball and they just left us in the home. So, my parents were stressed out. Right? They were totally ill-informed. They were abused themselves. They grew up in a huge, horrific mess. Really, both my parents did. Social isolation, absolutely. Family violence. And because they were both abused, it's cyclical. And it just really set us up for a bad fall. Now, this is what happens with a lot of families. I don't think that my parents, when they first started out, thought, hey, we'll get married and we'll just abuse our children. It'll be great. I'm sure they did not start out that way. My mother left her abusive family and her abusive mother behind to marry an abusive man who she thought she loved, and she thought that he would be the answer to all of her problems. My dad, on the other hand, was abused as well, and he was expecting my mother to be everything, to solve his problems. And because she couldn't solve his problems and he couldn't solve her problems, they took it out on each other and decided that to become each other's worst enemies, right? Which is what they did. And so, they didn't start out with this idea that, oh, well, we'll just get married and then we'll just have kids and we'll abuse them and totally ruin their lives and trash them. I don't think that's the case with most people, with most abusers. Like, people don't just say, oh, hey, what do you want to do when you want to grow up? When you grow up, well, I want to get married, have a bunch of kids, and abuse them. I mean, people don't set out to do these things. These are situations where people find themselves in not able to cope, not able to function, and sadly enough, slip through the cracks. You know what I mean? They either don't reach out for help because they don't want to change, or they don't know that they can change, or they just don't want to change. Lots of times that's the case. My parents didn't want to change. Or that, they don't realize that there is other ways of dealing with things, that there is other options. There's always other options. There's always better options. And many times people will not make those correct decisions on behalf of their children, which is really sad. But they said in most extreme and tragic cases of profound neglect, such as when children are raised by animals, the damage to the developing brain and child is severe, chronic, and resistant to interventions later in life. And they go on to talk about that. They said the response to threat. So when a child is exposed to any threat, his or her brain will activate a set of adaptive responses designed to help them survive. So there is a continuum of adaptive responses to threat, and different children have different adaptive styles. Some use a hyperarousal response, which is fight or flight. Some a dissociative response, which is tuning out the impending threat. And in most traumatic events, a combination of the two is used. And I know, like in my own family, I was hyperarousal response because I was fight or flight, and I've always been like that. And that's just the way that I handled it, and that's the way I handle things. But my sister was the dissociative type. She tuned it out. She just tuned everything out, and she actually says that she wasn't there. She just says, well, I wasn't there, or I was never there, and she was there. She just doesn't, that's her way of dealing with it, is to dissociate, to actually tune it out, right? And so everybody will handle these things differently. Children will definitely handle things differently. A child adopting a hyperarousal response may display defiance, easily misinterpreted as willful opposition. That was me. That was used to get me in a lot, right? They said these children may be resistant or even aggressive. I was definitely that way. And but I was also mimicking my mother's behavior because, my mother was my teacher, right? And my dad. And they taught me how to behave, they taught me how to hit and how to rage and throw tantrums, right, when I wanted something, right? because that's how they got what they wanted, was hurting someone or abusing someone or screaming, throwing things. Well, I just picked that up from my parents, and so I took that on, and I took that into school with me. Like, I took that everywhere, and I was mistreated for it. My parents would then beat me because I had these bad behavioral problems, really, but what I was doing was just copying them. And so that's why I'm all my shows, especially One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, I gripe about that a lot, because I'm like, they raised me to behave a certain way and then made me pay the price for it. So, and that's sad. That's really sad. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to raise you up to be a bad child, and you're going to have all kinds of behavioral problems, and then we're going to beat you for it. Like, that's setting a child up for a fall in a big, big way, and that's what my parents did. They said they're in a persistent fight or flight state, and they often display hypervigilant anxiety, panic, or increased heart rate. Well, that's me. And everybody I meet on the street really is an enemy. And that's just the truth of it. People, I don't trust people. That's my natural state. I have to actually learn to trust. And people have to kind of show me that they are trustworthy. Otherwise, I tend to push people right on out of my life really quickly. And people that want to stay in my life generally have to kind of push to be in my life, because I actually don't allow people in my life, right? And people that want to be in my life actually have to kind of fight to get in there, and that's really sad. But that's what happened to me, because I grew up with my mother pushing me away, and my dad, same thing. My mother was, very abusive towards me and always pushing me away and saying, get away from me. You're a rape child. I don't love you. Get away from me. That kind of stuff, right? So then I started to push other kids away. These little kids would come up to me and they want to be friends, give me a hug or whatever. I had these little kids that liked me, these little kids that were my peers. They were like maybe a year younger than me or whatever, cute little kids. And they would come up and try to give me a hug or whatever, and I would push them down. And I'd be like, get away from me. I didn't call them a rape child, but I'd be like, get away from me. I don't love you. That's what I would tell them. And that's because that's what my mother was telling me, because I was always running to hug my mother, and she was always pushing me away and pushing me down and telling me to get away from her. So that's what I learned how to do, and I learned how to do that for my own protection later on, is to push people away and push people out, and that way I don't have to, they can't get close to me, they can't hurt me, right? And so it's a very lonely life, doing stuff like that. I've had lots of people in my life that I've pushed out, especially later in life. I really have gotten to the point where, I have a hard time with relationships, because I'm almost like, I can't take any more BS. I really can't. I'm tired of it. It's like if people have to really prove themselves to stay in there, because otherwise I'm like, nah, got no time for you. And that's really sad. That's a really sad way to be, but my parents set me up for that. And I'm trying to learn, how to give people the benefit of the doubt. I want the benefit of the doubt. So it's taken me the last better part of this last 5 years to do that, and that's what I've had to do. But it's hard. I've pushed a lot of people out of my life, and because I figure they're gonna push me away. See, it's my way of saying, okay, you can't hurt me because I'm gonna first, and I'm gonna back off, and I'm gonna push you out of my life before you can push me out, because for me rejection is the end of the world. Like rejection to me is, because I've been rejected my whole life by my family, by my mother, by my dad, by my siblings. I was the last born, and I was not wanted. I was a rape child. My mother made it very clear to the family and me that I was just a rape child. She hated my guts. I should have died with the other kids. And she would say this to the other kids too. She would tell me this in front of them. So they grew up hating me. All of my siblings actually treated me differently. They treated me like one of these kids that shouldn't have been there. I was eating food that they could have had. And they kind of treated me like as if I didn't belong. You know what I mean? Like I shouldn't have lived. I shouldn't have made it. I was always the one who was looked at as the hassle in the family, and they would vouch for that. I'm sure they would. Most of my siblings are dead, but if they were here, they would probably vouch for that, because they know that was the general attitude. And so it caused me to have huge problems with people. Like, it's like, okay, you're going to reject me eventually. You're going to hate me eventually, because everybody ends up hating that's the way I grew up. That's the way life is for me. And it's so sad, because I lose out on a lot of great relationships and great friendships because of that. And it's something I've had to work on. I've had to really work on it. It's not easy, because it's hard for me to trust people. And it's hard for me to trust that they aren't going to eventually throw me out of their life, right? Because my mother was always throwing me out of hers. She wouldn't let me in, period. And so, it's kind of, that's my first nature to be like that. So I have to try to work around that. This is the kind of stuff that happens to kids, right? Very, very hard on people. And it follows you your whole life unless you get help with it. You know what I mean? And this is why then a lot of people, when they have children, they do the same things to their children, right? I didn't have any children because I was raped and sodomized as a child, and I was sexually used for a period of time, and it caused severe damage. And I went in for gynecology checkup, and they said, no, you probably won't carry children, So I had a baby, but I lost it halfway through the pregnancy. So miscarriage about halfway through. So sadly enough, I never got pregnant anymore. I can't have children. But the thing is had I had children, without getting help and without getting the proper help, I probably would have passed on some of this stuff to a child because it's all I knew. You know what I mean? Until I was ready to make a change, which was 5 years ago. People who have suffered abuse and suffered, so much psychological and so much manipulative, emotional, psychological garbage, as well as physical, it affects your brain. And unless you really want to work at it, you will continue to do these things. You know what I mean? So that's why it's very important for people who have been abused to get some help. Like my parents, they did what they did because they would not get any help. They wouldn't get any help for their marriage problem. They wouldn't get any help for their own personal problem of being abused as children. And they needed help, They needed help to understand how to look after their children. They weren't looked after properly, so they didn't know how to do it properly. And they weren't shown how to cope. So they needed to learn how to cope as a family. So we needed family counseling. So my parents really, because of because they didn't want to work at it, be too hard. That's what my mother was always saying. Oh, it's just too hard. It's just too hard. She'd be like, I don't care if I lose you. After she beat the shit out of me, I'd be like, like what am I going to tell the teachers? What if they call the authorities? Because my parents were busted on child abuse charges, and my mother would beat on me, and I had to go to school with bruises and welts and bloody nose and fat lips. And she'd be like, I don't care. What are they going to do? They didn't do anything before. They're not going to do anything now, and it's my right. I can do whatever I want to you. And I'd just go to school, and sure enough, nobody would do anything. Teachers wouldn't do anything. Nobody would, it's just like, yeah. I mean, this is how it is for kids out there today. I want people to know. Nothing's changed in the last 40, 50 years. And people like to think things have changed, but they haven't. There hasn't been one change. Kids are still showing up to school. They're still being abused. They're still being killed and murdered at the hands of their parents. Nothing has changed. And yet billions and billions and trillions of dollars have gone into the system. If not, trillions now, right? Trillions and trillions, and there's been nothing done. It's a really sad state of affairs. But the issue is that my parents, had they got help, they could have learned how to change on it. We could have been family, and they could have learned how to care about us and care about each other, care about themselves, and they could have changed that, right? But they didn't want to. There was going to be too much work. Now so many survivors will say that, oh, it's just too much work. I thought, how many years do I have left? And 5 years ago when I decided to not kill myself and I decided to live and actually get help, I thought, okay, I don't care how long this takes. I don't care if this takes the rest of my life because I got to change this. I cannot continue on the same road that I'm continuing on, which was this hellhole that my parents set up for me. I have to change this. So, it's an issue where people, a lot of it is psychological, but some of it is physiological. You know what I mean? And so you have to get help. You cannot let this stuff continue to destroy your life. You know what I mean? If you're a survivor. And it's tough. It really is. My parents, they didn't want to bother, so they just continued to abuse their children. They abused each other, and it was just their life. That's what they said. Oh, well, it's just our life. Would have been different had they done time. Now, had they been brought in, had they had to do time, I think they would have changed their tune a little bit. If they would have done jail time, yes, that would have changed their tune. Because I know my mother would not have wanted to go to jail. Now she would have been the bruiser in the jail because my mother was a bruiser. Man, she was almost 6 feet tall. She weighed about almost 300 pounds at one point, and she could take you on. She used to take my 6'5" brothers on. My brothers were all over 6 feet, and my mother could take them on no problem. She was a tough woman, and my dad was over 6 feet, and he was a tough guy from the military, from the Canadian military. And the two of them, when they fought, you better get out of Dodge because things were going to get busted. Like, they were so huge that they were over 6 feet. My mother was almost 6 feet. And they would tear the house up. They would tear each other up. Literally, my mom would bust things over my dad's head. My dad would punch my mom in the face, and they would beat on each other, and they would get hurt. And they didn't care. And when they hit you, boy, you knew it. My mother was almost 300 pounds, almost 6 feet tall, and she would pick up the heaviest thing she could, and she would knock you silly, man. She didn't care. She really didn't care if she did brain damage or not. And I went in for tests when I was 18 years old, and had a pretty bad car accident with my friends, and I was driving. I had to go for a full scan, like a full body scan and everything. They were doing a whole series of tests on my head and my neck and stuff, right? And there was blood in my ears. They couldn't figure out where it's coming from. So they were doing some serious tests on my head, and they were like, whoa. They were like, what happened to you as a child? And I was like, well, they were like, man, we know X-rays don't tell lies, this is not normal, and it was obvious, it just abusive head trauma is what it was. And the issue is I had so many concussions as a child. I was just like, one more blow to the head is going to probably do it. And I was like, yeah, go ahead, kill me. I don't care. That was my attitude, right? But they said children may be detached. They may become numb. They may have a low heart rate in that case. Like, it's just depending on how they handle things. They may withdraw into a fantasy world. My sister did that. My sister was very much dissociative. They said a dissociative child is often compliant, even robotic, displays rhythmic self-soothing such as rocking, or may faint if feeling stressed. My sister is exactly like that. And dissociation is more common in young children, females, and during traumatic events characterized by pain or inability to escape. And they said differential state reactivity, a child with a brain adapted for an environment of chaos, unpredictability, threat, and distress is ill-suited to the modern classroom or playground. And it is an unfortunate reality that the very adaptive responses to help the child survive and cope in a chaotic and unpredictable environment puts the child at a disadvantage when outside that context. Absolutely. They said the result is that even when there's no external threat or demand, they're physiologically in a state of alarm, of fight or flight. And when a stressor arises, perhaps an argument with a peer, demanding school task, they can escalate to a state of fear very quickly. And when faced with a typical exchange with an adult, perhaps a teacher, in a slightly frustrated mood, the child may overread the nonverbal clues, such as eye contact or touch, and compared to other peers, therefore traumatized children may have less capacity to tolerate normal demands and stresses at school, home, and social life. And that's exactly what's wrong with me. I can't deal with anybody really saying anything to me. It's all abuse to me, because that's how I react. You know what I mean? It's like if somebody's mad at me, it's the end of the world. Because when my mother was mad at me, it was the end of the world. And when my dad was mad at me, it was the end of the world. My dad was always threatening to kill us, and he was going to kill us all, and he was just crazy. But this is the kind of stuff that happens to children. It's like they all of a sudden then cannot deal with authority figures. And anybody who's an authority figure, it doesn't matter who it is. And they have a hard time with bosses. They have a hard time with relationships because of this. It definitely affects the brain. It absolutely does. But you can go on and read more of this article. It's a great article. And thanks, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate everybody who tunes into the shows and archive. A lot of people listen to the archives. Thanks very much for tuning in. Have a great night, everybody. I'll be back on tomorrow and the weekend, and then again on Monday night, one shot of Each Survivor to another at 9 p.m. instead of the morning. And take good care of yourselves. Just remember that there's kids out here tonight. We won't be able to save them. We won't be able to get them any help. But if you know of a child who's being abused, you make sure that you do the right thing and you phone the police. It's a crime. Report it as a crime first. Do the right thing. Make a phone call and report it. If you think a child's being abused and you suspect it, no harm done if it's not abuse. But if it is, you could save a child's life, right? Have a great night, everybody. Talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.